What would be the price of peace in Ukraine? Or should that be prize? A massive multi-trillion-dollar bonanza, if some reports are to be believed. Last year, Russia and the US came up with a 28-point peace plan, which, according to multiple media outlets who obtained a copy, wants Russia brought back into the global economy. It also touted a massive US-Russia economic partnership in energy, artificial intelligence, and critical minerals. Such a partnership would be a huge shift, given that Russia is currently shut out from the Western economy via sanctions. But worth trillions of dollars? Really? Although the world's eyes have been fixed on the war in Iran, the pressure is on for a peace settlement in Ukraine, as both sides grow ever more tired of the grueling conflict, which has lasted more than 4 years. Could bringing Russia in from the cold be the solution the global economy needs at a time when the war in Iran is wreaking havoc on global energy markets? Or could it be more trouble than it's worth? It's coming up on Business Beyond. Whenever the topic of Ukraine comes back on the agenda for the Trump administration, expect the topic of a massive business partnership to be portrayed as one of the big prizes on the table in the event of a peace deal. These two men, Kirill Dmitriev on the Russian side and Steve Witkoff on the US side, were tasked with finding common ground, and one of the areas they seem most aligned on is the idea that the US and Russia could, post-conflict, forge a relationship of unimaginably vast economic potential. The plan has not been officially published, and neither the White House nor Kirill Dmitriev's team offered us a comment when we asked them about it. But it was widely leaked to the media. So let's take a closer look at some of those economic proposals. The peace plan says that in the event of a peace deal, which, by the way, would give Russia large swathes of Ukrainian territory, that Russia will be reintegrated into the global economy, the lifting of sanctions will be discussed and agreed upon in stages and on a case-by-case basis, and that the United States will enter into a long-term economic cooperation agreement in various areas such as energy, natural resources, artificial intelligence, rare earth metals, and other beneficial corporate opportunities. And how much would all this be worth? The big figure in circulation is the frankly incredible sum of $12 trillion. But where did that come from? It's not a number that the US or Russia has publicly mentioned. It actually came from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He told reporters back in February that his own intelligence services had identified the figure of $12 trillion in documents related to what he called the Dmitriev package, named so after Kirill Dmitriev. We can't say for sure if this is what the US and Russian sides actually believe such a partnership would be worth. But what we can say, based on the people we spoke to, and a pretty basic reading of the facts, is that a number like this is simply not realistic, to put it mildly.
I think somebody added a few zeros by mistake.
That's Craig Kennedy from Harvard University's Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies and a longtime analyst of Russian economic relations with the West.
We've seen no substance whatsoever. All we have is exactly what you've laid out already. What I would say, though, is that Russia is not unknown territory. It's not terra incognita when it comes to the global business establishment, especially Europe, but also to a lesser extent the United States. Every rock was turned over, every tire was kicked in Russia for 30 years after 1991. So I would be surprised if there's anything at all new in whatever this plan is that's being circulated. It's just the old being dressed up again.
$12 trillion is not a credible number to attach to any business partnership or deal. To put it in context, it's almost 5 times Russia's entire gross domestic product. And it's more than a third of the combined US-Russia gross domestic product, according to the IMF. Given that there is still no substance to any of these proposals, we can only speculate as to what an actual US-Russian economic deal could be worth. But it's fair to say that at this stage, we can park the $12 trillion figure. But what is believable? Russia's most obvious selling point for the West is its oil and gas. And there has been an opening. The war in Iran and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has created, one of the biggest oil supply crises in history.
Moscow hasn't missed a beat in making that argument to Europe, saying, look, the world has changed now as a result of what's happening in the Gulf. It's time to reestablish our relationships.
Iran's sort of choking of the Strait of Hormuz and the war of US-Israel against Iran has created the opportunity for Russia to lobby harder for the sanctions relief.
That's Elena Rybakova, an expert on the Russian economy. She thinks that Russian attempts to get the EU and the US to drop sanctions are undermined by three things in the longer term. One, Russia is hugely dependent on oil and gas, and yet the West is ultimately leveraging away from these in favour of renewables. Secondly, even if the Trump administration were to drop sanctions, a future US president could restore sanctions in the event of Russian aggression. And thirdly, investor confidence in Russia has been fundamentally upended by the war. According to research by the Kiev School of Economics, companies which operated in Russia have lost around $170 billion as a result of the invasion.
What I think about the medium-term investment opportunities in Russia is that I think it is a mirage.
And experts say that Russia doesn't have the capacity to produce more oil, even if it wanted to.
Throughout the last 3-4 years, Russia's export levels have remained almost unchanged. And so even if we were to release all sanctions today, we would not see a substantial increase in Russian oil production anytime soon. And it certainly would be immaterial in the broader context of the supply problem we face today. So that's a line that Russia's pushing to try to play on anxieties. But when you examine it more closely, the argument falls apart completely.
Moscow seems to have accepted that its own future with oil is limited. In April 2025, it released a long-term energy strategy which estimated that crude oil production and exports would barely increase between now and 2050, in a best-case scenario, factoring in falling demand and tougher competition. The less optimistic scenario sees output and export volumes plunge. With gas, it's a slightly different story. The Kremlin still sees potential for a big hike in production and exports. In that same 2025 report, it predicts it will almost double pipeline gas exports by 2050, with LNG exports jumping by a massive 500%. That brings us to a key player in this story, the European Union. Before the war in Ukraine, the EU was Russia's best customer for gas. However, the EU's dependency has fallen from 45% of overall imports to 12% in 2025. Likewise, oil imports have shrunk from 27% at the beginning of 2022 to around 2% today. And with its Repower EU plan, the EU plans to completely phase out Russian energy in the coming years. Historically, Russia's most important economic partner was Europe, not the United States. The end of that relationship has been chaotic for Europe, but arguably even more so for Russia.
What you need to understand is that Russia's development as a modern country has been very much in a relationship of dependency off of Europe. Western Europe establishes its first trading ties with Russia in the late 16th century. And ever since then, Russia has gotten three critical things from Europe that have been essential to its development. One has been lucrative markets for its export goods. So it's not simply been trade, though. It's also been technology that's come in, and then finally capital, huge amounts of capital. So this relationship with Europe is a very old one. It's one of dependency, whereas with the United States, trade relations have always been, as you might expect, far, far lower.
It's true. In 2021, the last year before the full-scale invasion, EU-Russia trade was far greater than US-Russia trade, worth close to $325 billion at the time. That was almost 8 times what US-Russia trade was worth at $42 billion. But the EU appears determined to keep Russia out, even in the event of a peace settlement in Ukraine. Finding new sources of energy has been challenging for the EU, but has also caused serious economic strain for Russia.
Russia thought they could pivot to Asia and find a substitute for this, but what they've discovered is that Asia is no substitute for Europe. And they're starting to suffer from what you might call European withdrawal syndrome.
Janis Kluge, an expert on the Russian economy, says the loss of investment from the West has been particularly damaging.
What Russia has lost was, a lot of investment by Western companies, investment that was crucial for the development of Russia's economy, for improvement of productivity, especially because Western companies would bring new technologies. There would be spillover effects to the rest of the economy, and that is not there anymore because the largest Western investors have actually withdrawn from the Russian economy.
That has implications for Russia's outdated energy sector.
The really important technology, the high-end technology that Russia needs, especially for its increasingly difficult upstream oil fields, that all comes from the West, and that's been cut off now. And you cannot get that technology from China or India or anywhere else. And so that's posing a real threat for Russia.
And China has not shown anything like the willingness to invest in the country that Western governments and firms once did.
So we have seen that even direct investment coming from China plummeted after 2022. So China is also not a replacement for these Western businesses that were there. And especially last year in 2025, but also this year, Russia has struggled to, grow at all and to make any progress with its economy at all.
Even if we ignore the $12 trillion hyperbole, it doesn't mean that there wouldn't be some appeal for companies if sanctions were lifted and Russia was brought back. But the aftermath of the war in Ukraine has seriously left its mark for foreign companies that do business in Russia. Since the war began, the Kiev School of Economics has kept a detailed tracker of foreign companies' operations in Russia. More than half the US firms in Russia have either fully left, been suspended or paused operations, or are in the process of leaving or have already left. It's a similar picture for companies from countries such as France, Germany and the UK. Companies from China and India have largely stayed put. Patrick Lord is the CEO of the Risk Advisory Group, a consultancy which provides guidance on risk in markets such as Russia. He says that from an investor perspective, Russia has become very damaged.
You would almost say that Russia was uninvestable in its current form, and I think a lot of organisations, whether it's banks or corporates, have very much taken that view that they're just simply not you're not going to do business with Russian-linked individuals.
He says the fact that many Western companies had their assets seized by Moscow, despite assurances that that would not happen, has caused serious reputational damage. And then there's the issue of government control and overreach throughout Russia, including things like shutting down the internet. Then there's the fact that many in Russia may not want Western firms to return, particularly those who seized Western assets and brands and repurposed them.
They're not going to give up those assets easily. So how exactly are you going to recoup some of that? Some of the also oligarchs have moved into the sphere of directly competing or taking advantage of the fact that these foreign companies have left. They also don't want to see foreign companies back.
I mean, they'll send people like Kirill Dmitriev out, a suave, English-speaking, Western-educated, pinstripe, perfumed banker who talks about $12 trillion worth of deals. But once you get in the door, you still encounter the same old people who, many of whom don't really want you there because you're a competitor. You're only there because the government itself has not been able to create an ecosystem in which Russia can prosper on its own.
As you have seen, if you're looking for reasons why an economic reconciliation between Russia and the West is unlikely, you will find them. But what about the view that such a reconciliation is possible and actually might be beneficial for all parties involved?
Overall, the idea of intensifying economic cooperation between the US and Russia as a source for improving political ties, this tends to make a lot of sense.
That's Glenn Deason, a regular political commentator on Russian state-controlled TV station RT, formerly known as Russia Today, including since the invasion. He has also been involved with pro-Russian political party Peace and Justice in his native Norway, where he works as a professor at the University of Southeastern Norway, specialising in Russia. He acknowledges that the massive $12 trillion figure mentioned by Zelensky is unrealistic, as are some of the projects that have been mooted.
Yeah, I don't think the economies of the United States and Russia are that complementary that they could reach these kind of levels. I heard many things been thrown into this pot, some suggesting even a bridge between Alaska and Russia, this kind of thing. So some of these projects are not going to happen.
However, he gives some credence to the idea of US-Russian cooperation on projects related to energy, rare earths, critical minerals, and in the Arctic generally. Russia is an energy superpower, but exactly how much oil is recoverable? Government figures have told state media the country may only have enough profitable and recoverable reserves for the next 25 to 30 years. For rare earths, the US Geological Survey estimates that Russia has the 5th largest reserves in the world, but it has only one mining operation at Solikamsk and accounts for less than 1% of total global output. Glenn Deason says that the US, Europe and Russia should improve relations for global political stability and that economic cooperation would provide a bridge towards that. But Deason has been widely accused of being a propagandist for Vladimir Putin and the Russian government. He denies the charge of being a propagandist, and he says the fact that we even asked him this shows the problem that the European Union and those within it have with alternative opinions and perspectives.
I think this is a new trend in the West now. We just called whoever deviate from the main narrative of the government, and NATO's war slogans are just denounced as propagandists. But I think a wider problem is also we only talk in Europe now about use normative arguments, how we wish the world was.
Russia's untapped potential seems to excite the Trump administration, eager to gain an upper hand in a world where security of supply for energy and critical minerals has become ever more important. There's no doubt that if US technology, capital and know-how was given access to Russian oil fields, gains could be made. But it's a very, very big if, given past experience and fundamental differences between both sides.
Many of these energy companies have been through this story before, where they come in, they make an expensive investment, they put assets, and then they actually get skinned and then have to write it off. So I think they'll be very cautious.
Russia is a major competitor of the United States when it comes to energy markets. Russia, of course, is an oil exporter. United States is also a major oil producer. Russia really wants to become a big LNG exporter, and this is something where American technology could help a lot. But does America really want to help Russia to become a big LNG exporter?
Let's go back to where we started. Is it possible that Russia is dangling huge numbers in front of Donald Trump to appeal to his love of a mega deal, however unrealistic those numbers may be?
The Russians have understood that these huge numbers make an impression on Trump. They've seen how other governments have succeeded in securing trade deals or, close cooperation with the United States by putting out huge numbers where nobody really knows when and how they will be, achieved in real life and when this investment will actually flow.
Even if a peace deal is done in Ukraine, and even if the Trump administration pushed for some kind of economic cooperation with Russia, Europe's opposition matters more than Washington or Moscow might like to admit.
And what Russia needs most of all is to try and reestablish its access to European capital, to European technology, and to European markets. That's what's going to be a game changer for Russia. So this is really Europe's decision, not Washington's decision at the end of the day.
And if the US was to go it alone and bring Russia in from the cold, it might soon be reminded of the reasons for rupture in the first place.
Values that come with free trade, with rule of law, are inimical They are incompatible with the type of authoritarian kleptocratic rule that Putin wants.
And yet, Russia's size and its potential means that it cannot simply be shut out forever.
It's important to be pragmatic and realistic. So Russia is not going to disappear. It's going to be there. It's a huge country. It has natural resources, it has some people, it has highly problematic government at the moment, right? So I think it is also up to Russia to demonstrate whether it wants to live in peace with Europe or not.
For the people of Ukraine, that's the most important issue right now. But the question of Russia's place in an ever more complex global economy isn't going away. That's all for this episode of Business Beyond. Let us know what you think in the comments, and until the next time, take care.